Hi, in this video I'm going to cover the basic journal entries relating to process costing. So first let's look at the accumulation journal entries. Accumulation is the process of gathering our initial costs and recording them in temporary accounts before they are assigned into work in process. And so the good news here is that the accumulation journal entries in process costing are the same as the ones in job order costing. So let's just do a quick review. Redbird Manufacturing purchases $45,000 of raw materials on account and incurs $60,000 of factory labor costs to be paid next month. And so our journal entry to record the purchase of raw materials is a debit to raw materials inventory and a credit to accounts payable. And our journal entry to record the factory labor is a debit to factory labor and a credit to our liability of factory wages payable. And so now we have accumulated our raw materials and our factory labor into those initial accounts. Now let's look at our journal entries relating to the assigning of costs. Assigning costs is a process of moving them out of the accumulation accounts and into work in process inventory. So first, let's look at assigning our costs relating to materials. For Redbird Manufacturing, supporting records show that the assembly department used $24,000 of raw materials and the finishing department used the remainder. So in this example, we're using all $45,000 of the raw materials. And so if $24,000 was used by the assembly department, then the other $21,000 must have been used by the finishing department. And so then our journal entry is going to be a debit to work in process inventory for my assembly department and a debit to work in process inventory for my finishing department to increase my costs in those accounts, and a credit to raw materials inventory to move them out of my raw materials asset. And so now we have assigned our costs out of raw materials and into our two work in process accounts. And that's a big difference from job order costing. In process costing, we have more than one work in process account. Now let's look at our journal entry relating to our labor. For Redbird Manufacturing, supporting records show that the assembly department used $35,000 of factory labor and the finishing department used the remainder. So again, if all $60,000 is going to be assigned and $35,000 was used by the assembly department, then that means the remaining $25,000 was used by the finishing department. And so we can debit our costs into our two work in process accounts and credit them out of the factory labor. And so now we have assigned all of our factory labor costs into our two work in process accounts. Next, let's look at our journal entry relating to overhead. Manufacturing overhead is assigned to departments on the basis of 175% of labor costs. So the first thing we need to do is find our labor costs that we had just assigned in the previous journal entry, multiply them by our rates, to figure out how much overhead is going to be assigned to each work in process account. And so then to assign the overhead, we're going to debit those costs into our work in process accounts and credit them out of the manufacturing overhead account. And so you can see on our T accounts, I've added those costs in for the overhead. I just didn't have room for a manufacturing overhead account, and we didn't really need it, so I just left it off on the screen. Okay. Now that we've assigned our costs to our departments, we have one more step in process costing. Because remember, as an item is being produced, it has to go through all stages of production. And so first we're assembling our items and then we're finishing them. And so just like our products move, our costs have to move as well. And that's the process of transferring costs. So let's look at a journal entry. During the month, $23,000 was transferred into the finishing department from the assembly department. And so we have to do the same thing. We have to move them out of my work in process assembly department with a credit and move them into our work in process finishing department with a debit. And so our costs will move out of our first department and be added in to our second department, which is finishing. Okay. Now let's look at what happens when we complete some of our products. So when they finish being finished in the finishing department. So during the month, 38,000 of goods were completed in the finishing department and are ready to be sold. Okay, so now we have to show these costs. They're going to come out of our work in process finishing account, and they're going to go in to finished goods inventory. And remember, finished goods are goods that are ready to be sold. Okay, so I needed to make a little more room, so I moved all those accounts we were working with over, and now I'm adding in my finished goods inventory account, which is an asset, and I'm going to move my finished goods out of my finishing department and into my finished goods inventory account. Okay. And now we can look at the last part, which is when we actually sell those goods. Okay. So $20,000 worth of completed goods were sold for $60,000 on account. Okay, so first we have to do our journal entry for the sales side. So we're going to debit accounts receivable because it says they were sold on account, and credit sales revenue for the $60,000, which is our sales price. And then next we can record our cost of goods sold with a debit to cost of goods sold for the $20,000 and a credit to finished goods inventory. And so if we go ahead and add those into our accounts, we can see that the sold goods are going to come out of our finished goods inventory and move over into cost of goods sold. And remember, as we are moving goods, our work in process accounts, our inventory accounts, those are all assets that are on our balance sheet along with our finished goods. And then once we sell those items, that's when we create our cost of goods sold, which is what shows up on our income statement. Okay, and now we've gone through all of the journal entries for the accumulation, the assignment, the transfer, the completion, and sale of goods under process costing.